Article. There was an article in the first edition of the journal for the fourth naturalist and historian with this title by George Thompson. So I'll be referring to that today as we go. But just a quick introduction to butterfly conservation in case you've not heard of us. We're a UK-wide charity which was founded in 1968 with a mission to conserve butterflies, moths, and our environment. And we undertake that in a number of important ways, which you can see on the screen there. I won't dwell on those because really the meat of my talk today is this article from George Thompson. So there's the original first edition you can see on the screen there, Volume 1, 1976. I guess it was written in 1975 and published in 76 maybe. But anyway, George Thompson contributed an article which is Are Disappearing Butterflies? So I put a question mark after it as well, just so we can kind of drill in to see what's happened to butterflies since then, because a lot has happened in the past 50 years. And I think many people will chime with this. So George wrote at the time that there's a general impression amongst the adult population in Scotland that there are fewer butterflies about today than in their youth. Many knowledgeable naturalists also believe that this is the case. So, nothing changes. Everyone thinks that there's fewer butterflies all the time, and that was in 1976. He wrote that. And it's true though that most changes in butterfly distribution, um, but by 1976 had actually occurred before the end of or occurred before the end of the. I've written 20th century there, but I think I meant 19th century. Yeah, so actually they had occurred before the end of the 1800s, which is really what George Thompson was reflecting upon a lot of the time. But things have changed. Things have kept moving. And so our latest data on these, our biggest report came out in 2022, and it found that 80% of UK butterfly species have declined since the 1970s. Fortunately, we set up the UK butterfly monitoring scheme around the middle of the 1970s, so it perfectly kind of coordinates with George Thompson's article. So we have a lot of information since then. Now, these declines include their range, that's where they're found, and also their abundance, how many are found of each species. But that's not the whole picture. So the graph, I won't go into too much detail, but you can see these are basically the indicators for different types of species. The ones in red are what we call the wider countryside species. Those would be things like small white butterfly, green faint white, ringlet, meadow brown, etc. You can see their numbers haven't declined that much, but the ones which have declined more so are the habitat specialists, which require certain caterpillar food plants. They're a bit more fussy. So it's a bit more complicated than saying butterflies are declining, but we drill into the detail every year and see what's happening. So I want to look at a few species and reflect on what George Thompson wrote in the 1970s and see what has happened since then. So holly blue. Has anybody seen a holly blue in Forth area? I mean, not outside Forth. You've seen one? Yeah. Was that in Bridge of Allen? Yeah. Have you seen it since? Was that a couple of years ago? Yeah, that's it. Yes, I saw the record because I should say I'm the butterfly recorder for Stirlingshire, so I saw the record and I've been looking. I've been watching people's records. Um, interesting. Oh, and I've written Holy Blur there. I know how to spell Holly. I just noticed that just now. But yeah, so Thompson in 1976 wrote that the Holly Blue has appeared in Dumfries, and that was in 1950, having apparently spread from localities south of the border. So Holly Blue back then was maybe moving into Scotland a wee bit. And if you've never seen a holly blue, this is what it looks like on the screen. Looks very similar to a common blue, but you'll find them around holly and ivy and kind of shrubs like that. And you'll find them in early spring, as you mentioned. So you find them in early spring and in late summer. They have two broods per year, larvae feeding on holly or ivy flowers. And they've got second broods, as I mentioned, that come out in late summer. So these plants aren't rare. So holly and ivy are found everywhere. So perhaps it's a climate thing for this butterfly. And just to say, an interesting thing about them is that they also get tended by ants. I've seen this in my parents' garden. You'll see these ants going onto the larvae and tending them. They get like a sugary substance for looking after them. Basically, the ants act like the mafia, so they're kind of protecting them from other predators, but then they get this kind of sweet substance as their payoff. But numbers of holly blue in the east of Scotland have exploded since 2022. So this was the previous map from the early part of the 2000s, so before 2010. They were kind of, this is the east of Scotland, as you can see, so they were getting up into Cooper. But since then, since about 2022 or so, you can see they've really just exploded. That's going up right up the east coast, becoming very common in Fife, onto Dundee, and kind of going even further up the countryside. But if you look around here, though, they haven't really made an impact. So they've come in. So your record is there, David, up in Bridge of Allen. One was seen in Dunblane, but nothing really else. So we don't really know why they're not coming in here. It might be a climate thing, but nobody really knows. Um, One of the theories about why common blue, or sorry, holly blue have exploded so well is because their numbers are affected by a tiny parasitic wasp. These wasps basically will lay their eggs inside the larvae of the holly blue, and it can cause their populations to crash. The theory is that the butterflies, which have expanded north in the east of Scotland, have escaped the wasp for now, but it seems that the wasp is catching up. So people who saw lots of them a few years ago in the East are seeing almost none now. So perhaps, David, maybe your one got nabbed by the wasp. And they go in these cycles, these kind of 7 year cycles roughly. So Holly Blue might become a thing in Forth Valley, but we don't really know. It seems to have come in towards Kincardine recently, but we'll see. Then the wall brown, though, another interesting one. So the wall brown, Thompson says one of the most interesting changes in distribution over the last 150 years can be seen with the wall butterfly. It must have been found almost everywhere as far north as Aberdeen in the east and Glasgow in the west. And it's not a butterfly you see very much of now in Scotland, unless you're in the south. That was until recently. So basically, Thompson regarded it as being basically extinct in Scotland since the late 1800s. So this butterfly, again, it's not very fussy. It needs areas of bare ground with long grass. It's not a habitat specialist by any means, but it could be something to do with the microclimate that's holding this butterfly back. So overall, though, put it in context, since between 1970 and 2019, there's been an 86% decline in sites for the wall butterfly in the UK. Now, that one theory behind that is the fact that it's getting so warm down south that the wall butterfly tries to have a third brood every year. So instead of going into hibernation, those uh, those adults which come out at the end of summer, um, they come out at the end of summer and lay another batch of eggs. And those eggs will become larvae, which don't reach the right stage to survive the winter. So basically, they're making a third brood because it's so warm down south, whenever they would have been better off just having two broods and sticking to that. So it seems that the climate window, the kind of climate envelope for wall is moving north, and down south is becoming unsuitable for them because they can't do that third brood that they try to do. So yeah, it's kind of a dead end for them down south. But Scotland, as I mentioned, is romping north. So again, the early parts of the 2000s, they were just creeping into kind of Edinburgh, and then more recently they got into south part of Fife. But look at the map on the right-hand side there. You can see that their numbers have just exploded in the east of Scotland. They're doing very, very well there. So nothing's holding the wall brown back as far as we know. But if you look closer to here, I think they are creeping in, and I think they'll do well in Forth Valley, especially around some of the places with brownfield sites. So around Bo'ness, for example, you've got all that bare ground and long grass. I think they'll do pretty well around here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them moving maybe into even Alloa within the next year or two, just given the rates that they're moving at. So yeah, Wall is one to keep an eye out for. Again, the small skipper, similar to the wall brown in some ways. Thompson said that this butterfly could well have been more widespread in the past, but only just survived into the 19th century in Scotland. So it's been gone for a very, very long time. And if you've never seen skippers before, they're unusual little butterflies. They're regarded as being more primitive, more moth-like, and as you can see there, they've got an odd shape, but they are butterflies. And so they don't require a lot either. Again, they require long grass. There's long grass everywhere in Scotland. So the larvae feed on vigorous grass and they remain inside the stems through the winter. So it's basically areas where the grass is allowed to remain long because the females will lay their eggs in the sheath between the grass blade and the stem, and the larvae will remain through that in the winter. So not habitat specialists by any means. So by 2020, the species was as far north as Edinburgh. We're talking about the east of Scotland here. Things move slower in the west for some reason, but in the east, you can see it's moved very, very quickly. So it's moved into Edinburgh. It's jumped over into Fife, and it's coming along kind of Forth Valley now too. Now, there was a record a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, from Fillin Bing. So there was a good record from around there, but then nothing for a few years. But then look at this from this year. Blair Logie, just out the back of where we are, there were multiple sightings of small skipper out that way. So I bet next year this will be all over Stirling University's grounds, wherever there's long grass, for example, and it'll probably become a very common species because in Edinburgh, on the some of the butterfly transects, which have been running for a decade or so, this is now in some weeks of the weekly monitoring. Small skipper is now the most numerous butterfly that people are recording. So really, I expect them to be very numerous, and it's one to keep an eye out for now. So yeah, so that the nearest record here, I think, was yeah just outside Logie Churchyard and Cemetery there, but very very close to here. And then the comma, so I think comma is almost old hat nowadays. Back when I was first coming to Scotland, people were still remarking on, oh, commas have moved into here. And in 1976, Thompson regarded the comma as being extinct in Scotland, and there was only one record that I could find for this area before 2000, and that was in Alloa in 1875. So you have to go a long way back to find commas around here. You might have seen them relatively recently. They do have you see two emergences per year. The ones which you see in late summer, autumn time will come out in springtime, and it's their offspring that you'll see in the following autumn. You'll very often see them on like a rowan berries or kind of fallen fruit in late summer, and they look like a dead leaf. So when they close their wings, they look just like a dead leaf, and that's how they survive the winter that way. So they are a lovely butterfly to see. Um, this was the map in 2010 of this area, but by 2020, you can just see how many areas it has infilled. I would regard it as being a fairly common and widespread butterfly now. The larvae can feed on different things, mostly nettles, but they will also be found on elm trees and even I think blackcurrant they've been found on in the Highlands. So yeah, it's an interesting little butterfly. But Roy Sexton, you wrote an article for this for the journal here in 2007. You and Heather wrote that a new record for the common butterfly in central Scotland. And I think you had an interesting thing there about how it's about the gathering stone at Sheriff Muir and how it was like a natural. It's kind of the the kind of northern range, the kind of range of Palma butterfly in this area. So how times have changed in just under 20 years, where it's become a common and widespread butterfly all over the place. So the reason behind this could be climate change. So the climate has changed a bit since then, but also it could be a switch in larval food plant. One of the main larval food plants for comma were hops, traditionally hops, which were grown for beer production. Their caterpillars were actually known as hop cats and treated as pests. So they were pests of hop production. They were that common. And then they were basically almost extinct in the UK, except for in the far south until about 20 or 30 years ago, I think it was. And since then they've just kind of gone all over the place again. So changing times. And then with the small tortoise shell, so this is kind of going the opposite way. So Thompson said in 1976 that small tortoise shell is to be found everywhere, including centers of our larger towns. In some places in the UK now, small tortoise shell is basically missing from large parts of the south. People don't see more than one or two small tortoise shells in some places now. Certainly last year I saw, I think, one or two, and last year was a very, very low number for us. So the larvae feed on nettles, so shouldn't they be everywhere? Not a habitat specialist. So climate change has found out that recent research has found that drought in early summer is linked to reduced breeding success. This is because the larvae need actively growing plants with high levels of nitrogen and water. So possibly down south in England and Wales, where they're getting more droughts now, perhaps the nettles there just aren't growing that well anymore, and the larvae are struggling. It could be related to that. Um, uh, but in 2025, this year, I'm as I mentioned, I'm the butterfly reporter for Stirlingshire, so I can access all the records. One of the best ways that people can send in records is through a system called iRecord. So In 2024, I had 79 records of small tortoiseshells for the whole of Stirlingshire. This year, I've had 285. So the numbers seem to be going up and down every year, depending on something, possibly climate, but it's quite an interesting time for this. But we need to throw something else into the mix as well. So there is a potential that there's a parasite. This is a fly called Sturmia bella. This has been kind of identified as being possibly one of the reasons for declines of small tortoiseshells. This is an introduced species, so I think it came from Europe, or maybe kind of further east in Europe. It was introduced to the UK, and in parts of the UK where this fly is found now, it has been implicated in the declines of small tortoiseshells. The females of the species will lay their eggs upon nettles where the small tortoiseshell and other Lepidopteran larvae are feeding, and then the larvae, the caterpillars, eat the eggs, and then the larvae of the fly live inside those caterpillars and basically eat them alive. And it seems to be that this has been implicated in decline of species like that feed upon nettles. And then looking at the orange tip, so going a wee bit further into the future with Thompson, in 1979, he asked the question, has the orange tip butterfly arrived yet? To me, this is one of the commonest butterflies that you see. Everybody, everybody can recognize the orange tip. It's a very easy butterfly to see. Its caterpillars feed upon common plants like cuckoo flower or garlic mustard. But yeah, so Thompson was wondering when people would see it, and he says at the time it was in the borders in Angus. Says if the momentum of expansion of the orange tips range continues, it could not be long before it is noted in South Perthshire, Stirlingshire, and Clackmannanshire. So, how times have changed with things like this. So I won't even show a map of the species because it's basically everywhere. The orange tip is. Then the Northern Brown Argus. So our last speaker was mentioning, you were mentioning about farming changes in the yokels. Farming changes in the yokels could be related to changes in the Northern Brown Argus. This is one of our habitat specialists that I'd like to have a look at. So he was saying in Thompson in 1976 was it said in 1845 it was reported from Dumayet and was said to be not uncommon in 1852 in the Ochil Hills around Menstrie and Logie. So possibly a fairly widespread species at the time. Its caterpillars feed upon a plant called common rock rose. So this plant, though unfortunately, is easily grazed out by sheep. So whenever the sheep levels get too high, the numbers of rock rose just crash. They can chew it down to almost nothing, and therefore then the butterfly follows as well. So I noted in your last talk you said that I think it was Sheriff Muir was unsuitable even for sheep grazing after a while because it had been so damaged by the amount of grazing historically before that. So that will have had a similar impact on the Northern Brown Argus. So at the time in 1976, it was believed to only be in the yokels in Alva Glen and Craigleith. This was followed up by repeated surveys and such like. And yes, possibly the common rock rose was grazed out. So it was believed extinct in Stirlingshire until relatively recently. There were no records at all in Stirlingshire, the boundary of which is just the Blair Logie, so that's where Clacks starts and Stirling ends. There were no records between 1920 and 2020 until an ecologist who is also a volunteer with Butterfly Conservation. Her name is Ida Bailey. She got in touch with us to see what she could plant for butterflies in her garden. Her garden's in Blair Logie. She planted rock rose in and around her orchard, and I think the next year she had Northern Brown Argus in her berry garden. Like, and where were they coming from? So Ida got on the case, and there was the COVID lockdown, etc. Nobody could go anywhere. So Ida had time then to go up onto the hill above Blair Logie, and she found the first breeding populations of Northern Brown Argus in Stirlingshire since the 1920s. But that give us an idea that we should start looking for more patches of rock rose because if it's in Blair Logie undiscovered, where else might it be? So a few years ago, a few volunteers and I, some of whom are here today, we went up to the kind of crags above Blair Logie and we found and photographed the first kind of breeding Northern Brown Argus is there. And you can see in the photograph this little Northern Brown Argus in a pot. As soon as we released it, it flew away. So we couldn't take any nice photos of it. But you can see the landscape below with Stirling University, where we are now, and the Wallace Monument and things. So Northern Brown Argus has been officially refound in Stirlingshire, but that's not the end of the story. So we've had a volunteer called Stuart Cathro. He lives in Menstrie and he loves hill walking. It's one of his passions. So even in the winter, even at this time of year, he's walking the Ochils looking for patches of rock rose that nobody else can find. It doesn't flower at this time of year, so he's just looking for the little leaves of the plant and then mapping them. So thanks to Stuart's work and the work of other people, we now know that the butterfly is found. There's a really good population around Blair Logie, it seems. Also, two different colonies around Myreton Hill. Then you also have Craigleith and the big population at Alva Glen. So it seems that Northern Brown Argus is doing all right in the yokels. And now we're working with the land managers, the people at Edinburgh University and Future Forest Company and such like, to help plant more rock rose and to help look after the land. But as our previous speaker mentioned, though, there's a lot more tree planting in the area, and that could be detrimental to the species if it's planted on top of the colonies, or if once those trees get bigger, once their seeds start coming into the grassland as well, there's no grazing. Perhaps the grass will grow long, and then the rock rose will be sheltered out. So that could be a future risk for the northern brown Argus here. But yeah, I'm delighted to still see northern brown Argus doing kind of all right in the Ochils. But Stewart isn't a man to rest on his laurels, and now he's looking east of Alva Glen, looking for patches of rock rose that nobody has found, and possibly more colonies of northern brown Argus might be out there, stretching the whole way, maybe to the Lowland Hills. Who knows? But staying with that group of butterflies, the Lycaenids, so Thompson wrote small copper and common blue are found throughout the central belt, more or less commonly, frequently repopulating derelict land. And I suppose there would have been a lot of derelict land after the war and things, and there would have been kind of various different places for them to be. Common blue lays its eggs upon bird's foot trefoil, and small copper is on sorrel, so common sorrel or sheep's sorrel. So they kind of like these open, warm, sunny, kind of stony places, but also farmland, traditional farmland where you would have had more wildflowers in the sward. However, common blue and small copper have both had a distribution decrease in the UK since about the 1970s of about 37%. So really, if you can imagine, about a third of sites for these species just disappearing. And we reckon that the main reason for this are changes to agriculture. A lot of agriculture nowadays is very intensive. There's a lot more nitrogen, for example, being poured onto the ground. And a lot of fields now just have grass in them, like Italian ryegrass or something, but almost no wildflowers. So really, this is the reason that these formerly common species are likely to be declining, and development of some urban sites too. So just looking, I'll just do a quick run through on some of the brown butterflies. It's interesting. So again, Thomson grouped meadow brown and small heath, saying they were widespread and sometimes common on grasslands in central Scotland. The small heath has had a UK decline in distribution of 76% since the 1970s. Meadow brown only 22%, and that could be due to the fact that small heath larvae feed upon fine-leaved grasses, things like fescues and bent grasses, so the very fine ones, which can grow in rocky areas and poor soils, whereas meadow brown lay their eggs on tall, vigorous grass. So maybe all that nitrogen is boosting the meadow brown or not, so they're not declining as much, whereas the small heath are just not able to cope with these longer grasses. Again, nitrogen in farmland, I think. But yeah, speckled wood. He says of those, unfortunately, all the southern populations had disappeared by the early 1900s, and as yet, there is no sign of a return to its old haunts. But again, I've been speaking to people today who say that speckled wood is one of the commonest butterflies they see now. So it seems to have declined greatly, disappeared from almost all of Scotland, but is re-emerging back into the places where it used to be found. So it's one of the ones that's doing well. It's the larvae of both meadow brown, speckled wood and ringlet, both eat long grass. So it seems these grass feeders are doing all right. Then the white letter hair streak, bit of a wild card today, but Thompson didn't even mention it in 1976. So strange things can happen. It first arrived in Scotland in 2017, was seen, and that was in the borders, so really just around the borders between Scotland and England. It was seen in Edinburgh in 2024, but also Dundee in 2024. So it jumped from the borders to Edinburgh and Dundee in 1 year. Found breeding at both cities. Bit of a mystery to us. So this could be related to the recovery of elm trees because its caterpillars feed upon elm trees. but also maybe climate change might be having an impact as well. But if you can get from Edinburgh to Dundee in 1 year, I don't see why it couldn't come along the Forth to towards Stirling as well. I'm sure there are some old elm trees still around where this butterfly might do well. So it could be one to look for in future. So here's some thoughts and speculation I want to leave you with. So species are returning to Scotland's, obviously things like small skipper and wall brown are returning to Scotland. Some, like the white letter hairstreak, are arriving for the first time. Others are expanding their ranges. These are the generalist grass feeders, seem to be doing the best and expanding. But those that need short species-rich grassland are declining. Those are the ones not doing very well in our kind of farming environment. And the research seems to show that new parasites and diseases are likely having an impact. So what next? Who knows? So there are rumblings of a gatekeeper in Dumfries, and I think it was actually in Thompson's garden in Dumfries. I think it was him who saw the butterfly literally coming across the border and breeding in his garden. So, but they weren't seen this year; they were seen last year. So that's why I call it rumblings. We'll see what happens there. Brimstone butterfly. Oh, they should be showing photos. There we are. Brimstone butterfly occasionally is seen in Scotland. Its larvae feed upon uh, what do you call it? Alder buckthorn. Um, there isn't a lot of that around. But who knows? Maybe if more people plant it, the butterfly might come here and breed properly. Clouded yellow, they appear in the UK every year. They breed down south. There's no evidence of them breeding in Scotland, but who knows? They might. And what about purple emperor as well? Well, why not? Its larvae feed upon willows. They can fly quite well. They're doing very, very well down south in England. So maybe in the future, in 50 years, we might have purple emperor here, and even white admiral, and even silver wash fritillary, this lovely fritillary here. Again, they're very good flyers. It seems that their climate for them might be moving north. So we might have different species like these in 50 years. And I know that this is being recorded today, so hopefully YouTube might still be around in 50 years. And somebody might look at these and think that I was either insane or maybe bang on. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Now, so just to say, just coming towards the end now. So this is my contact. I can send it around after today. This is my email address if anybody wants to get in touch. But if you go on our website to butterfly-conservation.org/events /Scotland, you'll find out some of the events that are coming up this winter if you'd like to get involved. On the 26th of November, I'm going to be in North Fife near Cooper, managing land for Northern Brown Argus. There was a new colony discovered there, so we'll be on farmland cutting back gorse to help the species. And on the 11th of December, I'll be at Kensmere. You can come along and cut your own Christmas tree. There's lots of pine trees on the dunes that need cleared to help the grayling butterfly. So come and cut your own Christmas tree and help butterflies while you're at it too, and have a good day out. And then early on in the new year, we'll be at Wester Moss near Phillinbing with the Bog Squad, restoring the bogs there. And we've also got a volunteer e-newsletter that you could sign up to. And I think that's everything for me for now. Thanks for listening.